Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's Friday evening. It's 8 o'clock here in Poland. And yeah, thanks for joining me. I see we have Nicodemus and Andrew. Welcome, guys. And yeah, for the rest that show up, as you guys always do, I look forward to interacting with you. Yeah, today we're talking about the USA. This is very pertinent, especially in light of the victory in the recent elections by the God Emperor Donald Trump. So yeah, um, yeah, that was a nail biting, but well deserved, well done, and I hope that normalcy returns to the world. And I think it is, and I think we're going to have an outbreak of reason and sanity and push back against the crazy woke lefties. All right, so yeah, let me share my screen and dive into this. So Nicodemus, you're saying that you're listening to an Anthony Rogers video, and did his parents drop him on his head on purpose? Uh, yeah, what happened? Be very curious to know. And yeah, so guys, let's dig into this topic. One nation under God, America a Christian nation. So for decades we've been hearing, and I was also at one time of the view and of the impression that America's founding fathers were all secularists, were atheists, were deists, were just basing all of their ideas on an Enlightenment. Of course, we've since discovered that the French Enlightenment was rather pagan, rather socialist, rather violent, and certainly had overtones of Satanism and genocide. So this is something I've covered previously in my discussions on the French Revolution and on socialism and atheism. All of these interconnect, all of these intersect. So Tom Gyoka, very welcome. So much for Camel Toe Harris. Yeah. Um, we it's always good to enjoy the sight of lefties breaking down. Although I will say, watching these people break out in the most extreme emotional displays, which seem to be sometimes made for the camera, where they are screaming and shouting, there's to something that struck me this time when I was watching that's demonic. It's like angry demons are screaming and shouting, and so yeah, make of that what you will. But yeah, Catherine M, very welcome. Shalom Lloyd, chat, an excellent mod. Sorry for being late. You're very welcome. You're not that late, and yeah, unsuccessfully. Yeah, those missing votes. We'll talk about those. Okay, so guys, for decades, right, the founding fathers have faced numerous accusations, and we've been given reason, or we've heard assertions that state that these founding fathers were in no way influenced by Christian doctrine. They're not Christians. There was every effort made to make them everything but Christian or influenced by Christianity. So this is episode 1, and we're going to just introduce some of the ideas, and then I'll start exploring in more depth as we go. So for decades, the founding fathers have faced numerous accusations. So a common criticism doesn't just suggest, but it actually insists that they were primarily atheists, they were agnostics, or they were deists, and they sought very strict separation of church and state, leading to a secular government and public sphere. Some claim that these allegations are so apparent that no evidence is required to support them, and these assertions are false. It is true that not every founding father or early American leader was a devout Christian, yet many were. And even if they were not devout Christians, they were certainly, let's say, heavily Christian adjacent. Let me just get back to the chat. J. Corman Kane, God bless America. Yes. And I think he has. That bullet, that that was the shot heard around the world, buried on news media, and it's a miracle that was a miracle. The fact that it was a miracle that his ear just got grazed and he's lived to become the the president, to be elected, well, president-elect. Incredible. So keep him in your prayers, because I don't think they're going to stop. because, yeah, he is the man that gets in the way of their agendas. So let me see. So apparently Qatar has kicked out top Hamas officials now that Trump will come back. Yeah, but we still have to turn off the money spigot. You know, yeah, that's good. I mean, everyone is starting to make moves now that they realize that the weakness is now past, that they got to clean up their act. Influences down. Yeah. So let me see. You know, that's interesting. Yes, it reminds me about 2/3 of the mosques closing their doors in Iran, yet Muslims go on and on about how their cult is growing. Yes, and Christianity is growing too. It is growing largely. And I think you're going to see a resurgence as well, even in the West, where we're going to see people coming back to their roots, to their moral foundations. And this is something we'll discuss here as well. So, and let me see. So yeah, guys, thanks. Thanks all for being here anyway. And this first Friday evening for me, it might be morning, afternoon, or middle of the night for you, wherever you are. So yeah, if you do like this, please like, do share, do subscribe, and thank you always for your support. And I look forward to catching up with you in the chat as we go. So, however, the vast majority of the founding fathers of the USA acknowledged the significant influence of Christianity, the Bible, and Jesus on their lives. This was a big surprise to me to start reading and seeing their quotes and understanding their points of view, their perspectives. Right. So the following examples that I will give may not fully capture the faith journeys. I'm not here to do a biography of each of them, but I certainly will dive into some depth on some of them and then give an overview and some of the evidence taken from some of their writings and documents to show you America was founded as a Christian nation, and Christianity is supposed to be the if not official, well, is meant to be the founding and dominant religion within the US. But we will discuss that as we go. So let's continue. Without Christian virtue, America falls. This is certainly a view that you will come to see as you go through the documents of the founding fathers. And their idea of virtue is based in Christianity, especially in the presence and person of Jesus Christ. So this is a quote from the Congress, US House Judiciary Committee, of 1854. It's from the reports of committees of the House of Reps made during the first session of the 33rd Congress. Had the people during the American Revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. In this age, there can be no substitute for Christianity. That was the religion of the founders of the American Republic, and they expected it to remain the religion of their descendants. I would say that that is very clear. Had the American people felt that the American Revolution was a war against Christianity, was not a war that upheld Christian morals, Christian virtue, they would not have supported the American Revolution. And to say that there can be no substitute for Christianity tells us they are not fighting for Islam. Now, America has, of course, your First Amendment. You have the right to freedom of conscience, freedom of opinion, even freedom of religion. But this doesn't mean that these religions are there to replace or usurp Christianity, because America, to the founding fathers, was a Christian nation. Right. So that was the religion of the founders of the Republic. This was the view at the time, and this is in 1854. And it felt that, yes, we must remain a Christian nation with a Christian government. So according to the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, endowed by God, not granted by men, not granted through fiat by people, by governments. So these rights are given by God because these rights come from God, because God is just, God is moral, and therefore these rights, these human rights, are what flow out of God and are therefore part of the inheritance of those who are Christians and of those people, because we're made in the image of God. That is their view. And that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the founding fathers based this tenet and most of the Constitution on the Holy Bible. Statements from the Constitution signers, as we will see from Benjamin Franklin, as just one example, offer solid evidence that they were men of God and they adhered to the teachings found in the scriptures. Catherine M. says, No political paid parties were ever supposed to be allowed by the Constitution. So I'm not going to dig heavily into the Constitution. This is an overview. It's a first episode. I still have a lot of research to do. But yeah, let's not try to get too sidetracked into technicalities and so on. So let's just go with the flow here. So I see of this truth that God governs in the affairs of men. He doesn't mean Allah here. He means God, right? The Christian God, God of the Bible, said Franklin. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without God's notice, is it possible that an empire can rise without his aid? Because they felt that it was due to God's providence that the American empire, the American nation was established, the American Republic. And without adhering to the laws of God, to the morality of God, without following those moral laws and the precepts of the Bible, that America would fall. That America was uniquely this Christian country blessed by the Creator, and therefore they had to remain a Christian nation, walking in that path. So I know, Catherine, don't be sorry. It's just it's really though. If you ever do a stream one day, you'll find it's really hard to monitor the chat and then have to deal with like sidetrack issues. It's really tough. I don't have like other people, other staff working, so it's really tough. So it's easier to just focus and stay on the topic much easier most of the time. So yeah, I think this is very much an admission also by Benjamin Franklin, that he believes in God. He believes in God's providence, right? So George Mason is another founding father, and he says the laws of nature are the laws of God, whose authority can be superseded by no power on earth. So here we say no government replaces God. No government becomes God. No government rules in the place of God. That God is the supreme creator and he's the supreme law, and this would be the moral law, and we have to hold him as supreme within his realm, as the arbiter of justice and morals. And therefore you'll see as we go through this, that the laws of the United States and the government of the United States should always attempt to follow these moral laws. Watching from X, Matty D, very welcome. Glad to see you watching from X. Thank you. Okay, so let's continue. Yeah. So John Adams, Josiah Bartlett, Gunning Benford, and quite a few other men who signed either the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution made public statements referring to their belief in the sovereignty of God. No, Catherine, don't be quiet. I mean, I enjoy the conversation and the interaction, but yeah, it's just I'm alone today, so I want it's a little tough to monitor everything on my own. But yeah, I mean, feel free to throw in comments on the topic as generally related to the topic. Okay, so let's look at John Adams, the second U.S. president. He is a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was a judge. He was a diplomat and one of two signers of the Bill of Rights. And he was the second president of the United States. And he states the general principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. Note, not Islam, not Buddhism, not atheism, not socialism. The principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the principles of Christianity. I will avow that I then believed and now believe that those general principles of Christianity are as eternal and immutable as the existence and attributes of God. So I think that is very, very clear. What he asserts here, what he says, what he means, I think this is very clear. So there's very little argument about him trying to say he's promoting or advocating for atheism or Islam. He goes on to say, there is no authority, civil or religious. There can be no legitimate government but what is administered by the Holy Ghost. There can be no salvation without it. All without it is rebellion and perdition, or in more orthodox words, damnation. So he tells us that a government that strays from the path of righteousness, the government that strays from the path of the Holy Spirit, the government that strays from the moral precepts of the Bible, of God, of Christianity, is a government that eventually will fall into rebellion, a country that will fall into rebellion and perdition, a country that is damned. So these are people that state we are a moral people and we must remain that way. We must be a moral government. And the standard by which they judge that government is the Christian standard. Catherine, that's very interesting. That statement is why I think Muslims misuse the word attribute. Can you explain that? Just drop in the chat. Just say why. Just explain that statement. That's a very interesting. That's a very interesting comment that you're making. So just tell me more about that. I'd be curious to know more. So, right. Hoe gaan dit, broer? Lekker. Hein Pretorius, nee, gaat baie goed. Dankie. Hoe gaan dit met jou? Is baie koud hier. Brrr, lekker koud. Maar goed om jou te sien, Hein. Hoe gaan dit waar jy is? Is dit koud? Jy is in Groot-Brittanje, né? Ek sal daar wees. Ek kom. Ek wag vir my ek besoek. Ek besoek. So jy kan altyd my bel, ons kan praat. Okay. So okay, let's continue. Suppose a nation in some distant region should take the Bible for their only law book, and every member should regulate his conduct by the precepts there exhibited. What a utopia, what a paradise this region be. So this is interesting, constructing law from the moral law we find in the Bible. And these are taken from the writings of Thomas Jefferson in a letter from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson on June 28, 1813. Letter from John Adams to Benjamin Rush, 1809. And John Adams' Works, Volume 2. And a diary entry for February 22nd, 1756. Now, John Adams, he felt that religion was a force for good. Ja, dit word koud na hy. Ja, nee, dis net so koud hier. Is koud hier. Ja. So lekker wees om jou te sien, my maat. Sal probeer om jou te bel. Okay, ja nee, ons sal praat. So John Adams, religion a force for good. So he felt that religion was necessary. It was a force that improved culture. Right. So John Adams said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So do you think that the Constitution is something appreciated by the crazy blue-haired left, by the screaming crazies on TikTok? No, they want to undermine the Constitution. They want to overthrow the Constitution. They want to replace the Constitution because the American Constitution is derived from moral law. So thus the Constitution is made for people who derive their judgment from Christian moral law, not from Islamic moral law, not from atheist moral law, wherever they get that from. So Catherine says here, the use of exchanging the word attribute as a holy designation is a wrong use of the word. It's sloppy and inexact. Interesting. So you mean an attribute of God as opposed to part of the inner core nature of God, like God being just. Justice is part of the character of God. It's not an attribute. It's not like, oh yeah, I think I'm going to learn how to be just. So it's not a learned attribute. It's not an external attribute. It's not something that is a secondary part of his decision-making. It's something that's core as to who he is. I think that makes good sense, yeah, if I understood that correctly. So Frank says, Frank, Warrior for Christ the Fifth, or Frank V says, Jefferson made human dignity the core of the principles of the revolution, and he stated that the rights are self-evident and bestowed upon all men by the Creator. Yes, and they were fighting for liberty. And they said that liberty comes from the Creator, comes from God. And they're referring specifically to the Christian God. And that's a great point, Frank. Okay, so James Madison wrote that our Constitution requires sufficient virtue among men for self-government. And this is Christian virtue, Christian religious virtue. So for men to be self-governed, for men to be independent and have the freedom to live according to law, to have independence, right, to have liberty, they must regulate themselves utilizing the moral law that they got from the Gospels. This is what he is alluding to here. So otherwise, nothing less than the chains of despotism can restrain them from destroying and devouring one another. So we become more debased, more depraved when we don't follow this rule. And this leads to tyranny. This leads to despotism. So yes, Frank, the United States Republic is a nation under God. Exactly. And Matty D says that is an interesting point. Some say the French Revolution, contemporary to the American Revolution, failed because they threw Christian morality in the bin at the same time as their monarchy. And there's a lot of truth to that, Matty. There's certainly a great deal of truth to that. Thanks for that point. Yeah. Now, John Adams, unfortunately, also went, veered left and went off the reservation a little bit. So we've got to look at some of the fodder that the left has used and atheists have used, that the secularists and so on have used to try to undermine the Christian basis of their thinking, of their philosophy, of their legal rationale, and to see what these people were doing. But also, you've got to look at the milieu, the philosophical milieu of the time. They were heavily influenced by secularist thinking, by the French Revolution, by philosophers who were anti-Christian. Let's put that very clearly. So he does write here: Platonic, Pythagoric, Hindu, and Kabbalistical Christianity, which is Catholic Christianity, and which has prevailed for 1500 years, has received a mortal wound of which the monster must finally die. Yet so strong is his constitution that he may endure for centuries before he expires. That is John Adams writing to Thomas Jefferson, July 16th, 1814. Now, there's a lot that you can... It's easy to jump to certain conclusions and assumptions from the statement he makes here. However, I had to dig into this one in quite depth, and I had like a page and a half of notes explaining the context and his meaning and what he meant, and then I just deleted it all. I just thought it was too much. But ultimately, what he's really alluding to is that he feels that Christianity has been watered down. He feels that Christianity has been affected by many other influences, and it's not pure anymore. Now, there are reasons for that, and we will come back to this point and we'll discuss some of these influences and reasons. I have discussed them in previous shows, which didn't really touch on the American Revolution, didn't touch on the Constitution of the Founding Fathers or America as a nation, and the American founding myths and founding history. But at the time, you already had a movement in play which was attempting to assert very strongly that Christianity was false, was trying to replace Christianity with scientific notions, borrowed ideas from Christianity that asserted scientific perfection, and so on. And the idea of the corruption, this really became a very strong influence. And you had the restorationists. You know, we've recovered the original, primordial, true belief of God. You know, Muhammad came along and said, "I've discovered the primordial, original religion of God." You had Martin Luther stating that, "I have discovered the original, true religion of God. He spoke into my ear, true story. And I am now going to, give you back the original religion." Calvin said the same. Zwingli said the same. In fact, hundreds of people with totally contradictory, conflicting ideas made exactly the same claims. So this was something that was pretty common, and this clearly affected even the founding fathers. So despite any errors they might have made within their judgment, they at least still, to a very large degree, were influenced heavily by Christian doctrine. So, and of course, I'm going to state here, because I like for people to at least know my bias and know my point of view up front so that there's no surprise. But this claim that this is Catholic Christianity is utterly false. In this example, he is completely 100% wrong. So he writes also, "Persevere, gentlemen, in revering the Constitution, which secures your liberties, in loving your country, in practicing the social as well as the moral duties." So this is him writing to the Freemasons of the state of Maryland. Now, I decided not to include it, but there was a situation that evolved where Freemasons, apparently they had murdered someone. And he was trying to defend supposedly good Freemasons who were not involved in the murder. And, he was also trying to appeal and keep order. So people were starting to really hate the Freemasons. And he was trying to say, "Look, you guys, I know you're not guilty of this murder. We can't draw you into this, but you need to show that you guys are on the side of the right." And the moral duties he refers to here, this would also mean Christianity. So understand, he was very strong on moral duties, and these are Christian moral duties. John Adams wrote to his beloved Abigail as the Continental Congress prepared to sign the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. And he wrote, "It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance." That is a very religiously loaded word. "By solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty." So the Declaration of Independence should be thought of, commemorated, and celebrated as an act of deliverance by God, and therefore the Americans should give devotion to God. I'd say that is a very strong Christian religious message. This is unambiguous. "And even though we should rue it, which I trust in God we shall not, I must submit all my hopes and fears to an overruling providence, in which, unfashionable as the faith may be, I firmly believe." So he believes in providence. He believes in God. So even if that is unfashionable, he firmly holds this belief. So yeah, let me see if I've missed anything. The French Revolution, that's saying just that it's going to push violence for the sake of violence or to bring down all things. The French Revolution was socialism. It was a corruption of Christianity. The socialism that they practiced, this was modern socialism. And they had essentially taken Christianity, stripped out everything that was religious, and tried to use that same core as a glue to push their own ideas. So all of these things are really just a ripoff of Christianity in some way or other, and the corruption thereof. So let me see if I've missed anything. Let's see. Western nations have democratic government because they're built on Judeo-Christian principles, and they will remain free only if God is at the core. And I agree with that. There's a lot of truth to that. Okay, let me see. Yeah. So John Adams was a boss. John Adams also was wrong about some things. All right, but I think we can see there's a very strong Christian message here. Right. Now, civics, Madison and the Federalist papers. I actually started reading some of the Federalist papers. There's some interesting writing in there, really good philosophy. And so these guys really were interested in exploring the pinnacle of human thought. So the founders were influenced by Judeo-Christian values and had faith-based principles. They recognized humanity's imperfect nature, and they'd experienced oppression from the Parliament and the Crown. That's the British Crown, which obviously led to the American Revolution. Now, they had a strong distrust of concentrated power, and that would be called big government, socialism, communism. So James Madison, who lived from 1751 to 1836, was an American statesman, a political theorist, and a founding father, and he viewed concentrated government power as the very definition of tyranny. He wanted small government, he wanted liberty. So big government, and you would say that Democrat government, growing government, that is the definition of tyranny. Show me your papers or you can't go and have coffee, right? We've been through that just a couple of years ago. So, but what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? That is James Madison, Federalist Papers, number 51. Government is the greatest of all reflections on human nature. Bad government clearly then is following bad philosophy and has the wrong view of human nature. And he writes here, to each new generation, the virtues without which free societies cannot survive: basic honesty, integrity, self-restraint, concern for others, and respect for their dignity and rights, civic mindedness, and the like. So now this is from Robert P. George from Ruling to Serve. So this is a very well-known article discussing the thoughts of James Madison. And these virtues would be Christian virtue. So James Madison established liberty-preserving principles in government structure. He divided power between federal and state governments. So you wouldn't have concentrated power in the federal government, nor would you have little city-states, minority rule in these states. And he apportioned federal power among three branches. Now, I am not a constitutional expert, and we don't need to be because we're just going to do a very light overview here. There's the legislative branch, which makes law. That's your Senate and the House of Representatives. You have the executive branch, which enforces the law, headed by the president. And you have the judicial branch, which interprets the law. That would be your courts and judges and the Supreme Court and so on. So let me see. Frank says, this is why the left tries to destroy history and order and the church and the family. Yes, the history, unfortunately undermines their little narratives. So he limited federal government to delegated functions, and that's within the Constitution. The government doesn't have supreme rule and supreme overreach. Now, do we follow Christian virtue or new woke virtue? This is the new woke moral system. So he acknowledged that structural devices alone were insufficient for preservation of the nation. Having laws, having a constitution, and as George Bush was supposed to have said, I can't verify if this is true, George Bush supposedly said that the Constitution is just a goddamn piece of paper. So a piece of paper is not sufficient for the preservation of the nation. You need a people that are formed and molded by the concepts, by the morals within that paper. So the structural constraints of the US Constitution are ineffective without institutions that educate people on how these constraints protect liberty, why that liberty is crucial for the nation's success, and how to cultivate the virtue necessary to resist a culture of instant gratification. Yes, Catherine, woke virtue is an attribute of a Satanist. That's George Bush, not the George Bush Jr. So And we'll see that all of these ideas enshrined here are basically derived from Christianity. And you'll be surprised what the founding fathers actually had to say. So from Alexander Hamilton, Federalist number 61, as the select assemblies for choosing the president, as well as the state legislatures who appoint the senators, will in general be composed of the most enlightened and respectable citizens. And these are citizens who are respected because they follow Christian morals. There's reason to presume that their attention and their votes will be directed to these men only who have become the most distinguished by their abilities and their virtue. So these people must be virtuous, and abilities which is based on merit. So America is a merit-based system, and in whom the people perceived just grounds for confidence. The Constitution manifests very particular attention to this object. So people must have competence, and they must be virtuous. Virtuous by what standard? Not by the Muslim standard, not by the atheist standard, by the Christian standard. So hence the attempt by the wokists to redefine morality, to redefine what is good and evil, to enshrine evil into law. And understand that ideological warfare is always moral warfare. So they want to say that that's not evil because there's no such thing. That's just continuums or whatever words they use. But really, ultimately, they're always biased in the favor of one side. And it's always an inversion of what we would consider good and true and right. So now, Adams had some religious ambivalence. He believed in the need for a virtuous citizenry for successful democratic government, relying on moral and ethical standards derived from Christianity. So he believed that a stable and effective government requires a populace that adheres to moral principles. He argued that without such a foundation, human passions like greed and ambition would undermine the Constitution's effectiveness. To him, as religious moral authority wanes, so too does the moral compass. So there had to be moral authority. And where did people learn that? School, because of religious instruction in schools and churches. Adams critiques established religious traditions while acknowledging their historical significance. So he became critical of the church. He became critical of Orthodox Christianity, but yet still acknowledged its importance, its critical function in society. So he suggested that while religious traditions may have provided moral guidance, decline would lead to societal instability, if not replaced by other forms of moral instruction. Thank you, Catherine M. That's very kind. She says, my soul has been deeply nourished by so many teachers like Lloyd I found online. Thank you very much. So his quotes reflect a belief that religion is crucial for instilling morality within society. And without a robust religious framework, people might succumb to immorality and chaos, which would render the Constitution ineffective. His comments were made when Enlightenment ideas were challenging, in fact, attempting to destroy, attempting to undermine, attempting to replace Christian religious beliefs. So his comments indicated the desire to maintain a moral foundation. So he was influenced by some of these external ideas. So he believed that as traditional structures weakened, it became increasingly important for society to cultivate new forms of morality rooted in reason and virtue. So obviously they're looking at the Enlightenment. They're looking to create a more perfect union, a better society. So he was looking at the great thinkers of the time. He was looking at the philosophies of the time to see if they could find new ways of structuring a government. So clearly some of these ideas were adopted, but he never quite abandoned Christian beliefs. So John Adams and Jefferson. So they present two distinct approaches to faith and its role in public life. And they had different philosophies as founding fathers. So Adams was a former Calvinist. I've spoken about John Calvin. John Calvin is not quite, he was a bit more rational than Martin Luther, who was completely nuts. But yeah, John Calvin, murderer and dictator, was also a believer in predestination, but that's a discussion another time. I've covered Calvin. I've done 4 episodes on him. The guy was a Gnostic. The guy was a nutbag. So he was a former Calvinist Congregationalist, and he was also Unitarian. Unitarianism really got started just after, Unitarianism came out of sort of Central Eastern Europe. It was something that really flourished because of Muslim influence on Europe. This was during the time of the conquests, looking at around the 1600s, and it was, I would say, a first step towards Chrislam. So he believed in, now, from an Orthodox Christian perspective, from a standard Christian perspective, he was, at this point, he became a heretic, quite bluntly, because Unitarianism denies the Trinity, and by any Orthodox definition, this made him a heretic. So he believed in the moral authority of Christianity. He saw the state as dependent on Christian principles for legitimacy. He famously stated, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people." So Nicodemus says, why is a dude from South Africa telling me things about US history that I'm hearing for the first time, even after decades of US schooling? You've got to ask her, why has civics been removed from US education? Why is civics not taught in American schools? The history of the founding fathers. That is. So yeah, Catherine makes a very good point. The word enlightened was a deceitful use of the word, and that is true. So Frank says, Lloyd, you're an excellent teacher. Your purpose is so necessary. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you. So he believed in the importance of an organized religion and even advocated for, and listen to this, he advocated for compulsory Sunday church attendance. Insane. Adams saw the church as essential to maintaining moral order in society, a traditional view of religion's role in governance. So he never quite abandoned the church. He may have been conflicted, he may have been in error, but he still did not give up Christian beliefs. He saw the value of Christianity in terms of building culture, building moral people, building a strong foundation with good people who were honest, who had integrity, who believed in merit. So yeah, so kudos. So the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780 moved partway towards disestablishment by guaranteeing freedom and equality to all peaceable private religions, but also retaining what leading constitutional draftsman John Adams called a mild and equitable establishment of religion. Now, there are certain, I'm not going to go into any huge depth on this, but of course there are certain things, I will get to this, but there are certain ideas, certain concepts, certain writings that are used by the secularists, by the atheists, to attempt to imply that these people were just secularists, they were atheists, they were Enlightenment thinkers, they had no Christian influence. So this is one of these things that are a little bit ambiguous, perhaps, that they would use. But notice he called for a mild and equitable establishment of the Christian religion, not Islamic religion, not all religions, Christianity. So this consisted of a ceremonial establishment reflected in public religious language, and symbols, rituals, and oaths supported by the state. So a mild and equitable establishment of the Christian religion supported by the state. Symbols of Christianity, language of Christianity, rituals and oaths of Christianity endorsed by and maintained by the state. A moral establishment reflected in the virtues and values to be taught in state schools and universities and exemplified by elected officials and other public figures. When you look at universities, I'll get this wrong now because I've spoken of this in the past, but look at the founding of many of the Ivy League universities. They were founded as Christian universities. They were founded as seminaries. They were overtly Christian institutions. Now only they are secular institutions. They've become this way. Christianity has been driven out, but they were founded with a Christian bias, based on Christian doctrine. Ilan Leibovitz, thank you very much. He's just subscribed. Thank you very much for your subscription. So understand, Christianity was part and parcel of the fabric of the founding of America, of its institutions, public and private. So, and three, an institutional establishment reflected in mandatory tithe payments, required Sunday worship, and other supports for congregational churches. Fascinating. Adams emphasized that the moral teachings of Christianity should guide civic life, suggesting that without a shared moral foundation provided by Christianity, governance would be inadequate. So let's go to Thomas Jefferson. I'll come back to these figures and we'll go into more depth. So we're trying to do the general overview and introduce the topic. Hello, CMB. Yes, language has become slang slop, not fit for purpose. Yes. Okay, so let's see. Let me see if I've missed anything. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson, 1786. Now, this is a bill for establishing religious freedom, printed for the consideration of the people. So the Virginia Statute for establishing religious freedom was drafted by Jefferson and adopted in 1786. It affirms the rights of Virginians to choose their faiths without coercion. So you couldn't be forced into a certain religion. While acknowledging that future assemblies could alter the law, he emphasized that doing so would infringe upon a natural right. They acknowledged that America was founded on a Christian basis. Of course, there were other people with other beliefs. You had to respect those because you had the freedom of conscience. You had liberty. You had the First Amendment. So the statute passed with minor amendments became a pivotal statement on religious freedom that influenced the First Amendment. Jefferson regarded as one of his main achievements and a safeguard against tyranny. Now, of course, we need to understand that the secular religion that you see today is just that. It is a religion. It was sold as a religion. It was promoted as a religion. Its philosophers and founders all spoke of it as a religion to replace Christianity. It was the new Christianity, and now they want to claim it's not. That is a recent change, in fact. And this religion has now made its way, staked its place. It has displaced Christianity within US public life, and in fact all across Europe as well. So the opinions and belief of men depend not on their own will, but follow involuntarily the evidence proposed to their minds. Almighty God hath created the mind free. And he's saying here that we can see evidence of God. We can see that evidence in nature. And that God created your mind to be free. And God manifested his supreme will that free it shall remain. God gives you the freedom. And all attempts to influence it by temporal punishments or burthens or by civil incapacitations tend only to beget habits of hypocrisy and meanness. In other words, attempts to destroy the influence of God in the public sphere leads to hypocrites and people who go astray and are a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion. That would be Jesus Christ, and that would be Christianity, who being Lord both of body and mind, yet chose not to propagate it by coercions on either side. God didn't make you become Christian by the sword, as was in his almighty power to do, but to extend it by its influence on reason alone. So he said you have the freedom of conscience. God gave you a free mind, and it was in his power to force you to be a Christian worshiper. But he gives you the evidence of your mind, and he wants you to use your reason to see that he is God. So, yeah, hopefully that makes some sense to you. That this is very powerful philosophy derived directly from Christian belief. So let's continue. So Jefferson's Bibles. Now let's talk about this topic. This is something that is really viewed as controversial, but it's not. It's something that is misrepresented, and hopefully we can clarify. I won't go more than 26 slides. I might go fewer than that tonight. Oh, wow, Ramona V, thank you very much. So much power and passion for research. An absolute treasure. Thank you. That's very kind. All right, so let's talk about Jefferson's Bibles. You may have heard of it. For those who have, just drop a 1 in the chat if you've heard of Jefferson's Bible. Well, it's a misnomer. It's misnamed in that sense. So these weren't Bibles. These are abridgments, and they had a very specific purpose, and there were 2 of them, not 1. So let's have a look. There were 2 Jefferson Bibles. They were produced about 15 years apart. We know much more about the second one because it survived. The first one did not survive. The first was completed in 1804, the second around 1820. The text distilled Jesus's pure and unsophisticated doctrines, as Jefferson wrote. So the text was a distillation of the pure and unsophisticated doctrines. He specifically selected certain doctrines for a particular reason, which we will explain and he will explain. So the second is the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth, which was created in 1820. More elaborate than the first, it included parallel extracts from the Gospels in English, French, Greek, and Latin. The first had a particular purpose given for a particular group, and the second was generally for his own purpose, his own edification. So despite contrary claims, and people want to say, well, Jefferson wrote a Bible, and what he did was he took all of the miracles, all of the miraculous out of the Bible, because he didn't believe in that stuff. No, that is not true. So despite contrary claims, there are many miracles that remain in the Jefferson Bible, and I raise this because this is such a common point and a point of contention. Jesus sent his disciples to heal the sick, to cleanse the lepers, to raise the dead, to cast out devils. Matthew 10, verse 8. He healed a man on the Sabbath. He raised Jairus' daughter from the dead, as Frank pointed out. Matthew 9. He healed the bleeding woman. Matthew 9. Jesus healed 2 blind men. His work was an abridgment. So it was a summary. It was a summary rather than a reproduction. It wasn't a photocopy of the Bible. It was an abridgment with a very specific purpose. And he took what he specifically needed and wanted for his purpose. So Jefferson was not on a mission to eliminate miracles from the Bible, nor to include every miraculous event. He wanted a representative sample. So the full title here is The Philosophy of Jesus of Nazareth, extracted from the account of his life and doctrines as given by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, being an abridgment of the New Testament for the use of the Indians, unembarrassed with matters of fact or faith beyond the level of their comprehensions. Let's go back here. Pure and unsophisticated doctrines, because it was for uneducated Indians that he wanted to convert to Christianity and give them simple faith that was not beyond their level of comprehension, something they could understand as a primer so that he could then introduce them and lead them into the Christian faith. And yes, he did include miracles. Let's continue. So his abridgment was intended for the Indians, was not a biography of Jesus, only Jesus's philosophy, as the title states. So it left out most material found in the Gospels that didn't fit the goal of compiling a philosophy. So it was a discussion of Jesus's philosophy. It was not his attempt to use a scissors to get rid of the supernatural from the Bible. It wasn't his attempt to reject the supernatural from the Bible or from Christianity. So there is no evidence of a motive to delete all of the miracles or evidence of Jesus's divinity. So whoever's telling you this is lying to you, or they are, well, it's fake news. So he was the third president, and Jefferson made the largest land addition in American history with what is called the Louisiana Purchase. So suddenly, hundreds of thousands of Native Americans, many of whom had never heard of Jesus, were added to the American territory. And he wanted these Native Americans to benefit from the moral teachings of Jesus Christ. Now, a quiz. What kind of person would want people to learn about Christ and become Christians? Let's see. 1, atheists. 2, Martians. 3, secularists. 4, Christians. If you think the answer is 1, 2, 3, or 4, please drop the number in the chat right now. That'll be interesting to see. So who wants people to benefit from the moral teachings of Jesus Christ? Who wants to convert them to Christianity? Atheists, Buddhists, Martians, Muslims, or 4, Christians? Let's hear it. Let's see what you have to say. Okay, so he wanted them to benefit from the moral teachings of Jesus Christ. So Jefferson believed of all the systems of morality, ancient or modern, which have come under my observation, none appear to me so pure as that of Jesus. And that's in a letter to William Canby, September 18th, 1813. So the fact that he's saying that the moral system found in the Gospels, found in the life and practice of Jesus, is the most pure moral system of all, clearly indicates that he was a Buddhist. I could be wrong. Let me know in the chat if I'm misrepresenting that, if I'm getting it wrong, if I'm misinterpreting that. So Catherine says Indians were well versed in supernatural, but his effective, efficient didactic gave them a whole picture of truth. Yeah. So sure. Ramona says atheists 100%. So Ramona says they're atheists 100%, and yeah, it's going to be hard for me to argue against that because with all this evidence, clearly it's no, exactly. So all of these people trying to give you the story that he was some kind of non-Christian, didn't believe in Christianity, that's all fake news. So there is no evidence that I'm aware of that Jefferson ever published the philosophy of Jesus, right? So there's evidence that around 1819 he created a second version of his private book, this time in English, right, in French, Latin, and in Greek, the language of the Gospels. It was published after his death, and he used this compilation of the teachings of Jesus for his own personal edification. So, Jefferson's Bible and individual space aliens. Okay, Catherine's got me there. Space aliens. Jefferson wanted the Indians to believe in space aliens, and I think the evidence is there. The fact that he was speaking about Jesus Christ, everyone knows Jesus was an alien from space. I'd say that's a fair argument. There's no way I can refute that. Catherine. You win. You win. Again, it's Tony, I'm not sure I understand your comment. Yeah, so Thomas Jefferson's work, often referred to as the Jefferson Bible, is formally titled The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, right? Nazareth. It's an arrangement of Jesus' teachings and moral philosophy extracted from the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to distill the moral teachings, because he believed they represented the highest ethical standards. This was the highest of ethical standards of man's achievement of ethics and virtue. So Jefferson argued that government should not interfere with individual beliefs. His famous quote, "It does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God." So this shows his commitment to freedom of conscience, his commitment to the First Amendment, to the freedom of religion, certainly. It is the principle that one's personal beliefs should not infringe upon the rights or beliefs of others. But this is not a statement that says that he says, hey, look, Buddhism is just as good as Christianity, because clearly he does not say that. He doesn't believe that. His writings explicitly state that he believes that Christian virtue, Christian teaching, Jesus is the highest moral example. And this is baked into the Constitution. It's baked into the American founding. So he says, fine, if you want to believe that, you do that. You want to believe in the flying spaghetti monster, you can do so. That's all. He's not giving permission for anything else to usurp the Christian religion, but he's saying, fine, you are free, you have conscience. But he also states, we have a better example that he thinks people should follow. Catherine wins. Sorry, yeah, Catherine, you win. I will. What I will do is I will mail you some. I will mail you some fried chicken in the mail. I will, if you just drop us a post box, I will fry a chicken, put it in an envelope, and I will mail it to you, because that's because chicken is good. So I will also in Kentucky, if you want, I will do that, and because you deserved it. So one of the many tools that false historians have used against America's Christian origin has been the alleged Jefferson Bible, because Jefferson increasingly leaned away from Christian orthodoxy as he aged. Now, again, I'll say some of these things, but then maybe this is not quite true, because that's the standard narrative, which may or may not be entirely true. Maybe people are lying to you about that. So atheists and the irreligious have attempted to use him as a prototype of all founding. Soggy fried chicken in the mail. Okay, so you guys are familiar with that. Then great. Then I can do that. I can, because I was thinking these African practices might not go down so well on the internet, in the modern 21st century. But cool, if that's good, then I will send fried chicken through the mail. Okay, let's continue. So President Jefferson demonstrated deep concern for the physical and spiritual well-being of the American Indian. During his first term, he sanctioned many acts which obligated the federal government. Let me just. So he obligated the federal government. That's correct U.S. spelling. He obligated the federal government to facilitate the ministry of Christian missionaries amongst the Indians. So that doesn't look like the separation of church and state. That does not tell us that he was looking to separate the church and state. He was looking for the state to promote the church, to promote Christianity, to bring the American people into the Christian fold. Notice he didn't send Buddhists, he didn't send Muslims, he didn't send atheists, he sent Christian missionaries. I think the conclusion here is clear. So among various Bibles in his library, and yes, he owned Bibles, was the first Bible printed in North America, the Eliot Bible, translated and published in Algonquin for the Natick Indians, by Christian missionary John Eliot in 1663. So what I'll do is I might do another few slides, 5 more slides or so, and then call it a night, and we'll pick this up next week. So what are you learning? I'd like to know your comments. What are you learning from this so far? What is the impression that you're deriving? Because I'll dive deeper and deeper into the facts, and we'll provide more quotes and documents and references, so you can start to see just how the founding fathers were soaked in Christian doctrine, were wrapped in Christian doctrine, grew up in an environment that was wholly Christian. So let's continue. So, having provided the background of the 2 manuscripts on Christian morality from Jefferson's grandson. So this is about a book. Henry Randall is a historian, and in the 1800s, he wanted to make a biography of Thomas Jefferson, and he went to Jefferson's grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, right? And so Henry Randall offered further description of the 1804 manuscript, right? And this title and subtitle clearly explain Mr. Jefferson's intent in composing his first work, a work for the Indians. So let's look at the philosophy of Jesus of Nazareth. And you will get quotes here from Thomas Jefferson's grandson, extracted from the account of his life and doctrines, as given by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, being an abridgment of the New Testament for the use of the Indians, unembarrassed with or removed from matters of fact or faith beyond the level of their comprehension. So he wanted a simple introduction to the Indians for the life of Christ. And from all indications, Jefferson was initially motivated to write his work for the Indians by a friend, Reverend William Bennett. Not long prior to penning this work, he had received a letter from his friend Edward Dowse, who also sent a copy of a sermon preached in Scotland many years earlier that had been delivered by Reverend William Bennett. The title of the sermon was The Excellence of Christian Morality, the sermon preached before the Society in Scotland for Propagating Christian Knowledge at their anniversary meeting, Thursday, 6th June 1799. After reading the sermon, Jefferson responded in a letter saying, I concur with the author in considering the moral precepts of Jesus as more pure, correct, and sublime than those of the ancient philosophers. Right? It doesn't concur with him in the mode of proving it. He believes that you can derive the proof in a better manner. Right? He thinks it is necessary to libel so he says, unfortunately, the priest thinks it's necessary to libel and decry the doctrines of the philosophers. But he says, no, we've got to consider, what are these philosophers saying? Do they have good thoughts? Are there things we can learn from them? If this is the excellence of the human mind, putting itself to trying to understand life and the best way forward, then we need to study these other men and their thoughts. So he says, I give them their just due, and yet maintain that the morality of Jesus, as taught by himself and freed from the corruptions of later times, is far superior. So he says the philosophy of Jesus, the morality of Jesus, is the greatest. So I know there are Muslims who try to claim, well, do you know that Thomas Jefferson had a Quran and he believed that Muhammad was the greatest moral example of all time? There's a word for that. It starts with a B and it ends with a T. Drop in the chat what you think that word might be, right? Bent, blunt, bolt, belt. You let me know. So, but notice he speaks here of freed from the corruptions of later times. So here we have the inclination, or we have the clue that he might think that Christianity was corrupted. And here we might also have to, just like John Adams, start to think that he may have been influenced by the Restorationist movement, that he also got influenced by the idea, well, the Bible has been corrupted. Who else says? Muslims say that, I believe. The Bible has been corrupted. Well, there are hundreds and hundreds of figures throughout history, and they were legion at that time in history, where they're going, the Bible was corrupted, but me, I personally, whoever they, Johnny Wiseass, I have discovered the truth of the Christian religion. I'm going to reveal it to you because I have been blessed by God with the true knowledge, and I have rescued the true faith. And 1,000 other people were saying the same things, and they all disagreed with each other. So yeah. So let me see. Frank says, with the election of Trump, that's an error. With the election of the God Emperor Trump, we need to give him his proper title. We're about to enter a new age, a golden age of Christianity, and I think there's every possibility of that the strength of will might come back to defend and assert our heritage, our religious and cultural heritage, and defend it and promote it and push back against people who are trying to undermine it and erode it. So Europe is going to revert. China will be the greatest Christian nation on earth within the next 50 years, and that's great. Yeah. So let's see. JC says Thomas Jefferson had a Quran. It was a backup. Toilet paper was hard to come by back then. Yeah, true. Toilet paper must have been very expensive as well, so it was just easier to use the Quran. I agree. That's a fair assessment. And China has 400 million Christians apparently. I'm hearing stories about China. Yeah, I've been looking into that as well. I mean, we're just paying attention to that. Let's continue. So this is from the Christian Heritage Fellowship. Jefferson maintained contact with ministers, religious leaders, and other individuals concerning the work and promotion of Christian missions to the Indians. So here it's crazy. You've got this government man promoting Christianity, actively promoting the church, actively promoting proselytizing to the non-Christians. Among the ministers were Reverend Miller and Reverend William Lynn. As has been repeatedly demonstrated by scholars of Jefferson, his abridgment did indeed include miracles, given the fact that deists did not believe in God related to the world other than the initial act of creation. The fact that Jefferson did indeed include miracles in the first work of morality discredits and denies the claim that Jefferson was a deist, because he believed that God was present. He believed in the miracles. He believed in proselytizing. So the second of the two manuscripts, according to Mr. Jefferson's grandson, was titled The Morals of Jesus, right? The complete title, again, The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth for America's Founding Fathers. The foundation or basis of human morality was an important subject. What was the basis of the morality that they should establish their nation on? They wanted to start a good nation. So they were concerned with how individuals as well as societies determined what was right and what was wrong, why certain deeds or laws were wrong. And this was a real concern to them. So this was so important to the founding fathers, they wove it into one of 4 of America's organic laws, or most important statutes that had to be observed by all the other laws. So these are 4 organic laws, and these are laws that govern what is stated in all of the other documents that combine into America's highest law. So the 4 organic laws of America are the Declaration of Independence from July 4th, 1776, the Articles of Confederation, so that's 1777, and the Northwest Ordinance from 1787, and finally the Constitution of the United States, September 17th, 1787. So in America's third organic law, the Northwest Ordinance, the founding fathers inserted a requirement for the states of the Northwest Territories that would eventually join the Union. This requirement was fulfilled in the constitutions of other states as they joined the United States. And what was this moral requirement? Notice it's not a legal requirement, it's a moral requirement to be part of the Union. And this is in Article 14, Section 3. Religion, morality, and the knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. So religion is necessary for the happiness of mankind and good government for a good moral population. Morality, that reality based on which religion? Christianity. Knowledge, an intelligent, educated population. The founding fathers wanted an educated population, and therefore schools had to teach religion, morality, and knowledge to allow for good government of a good, educated people to provide for the happiness of mankind. And therefore, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. So yeah, let's continue here. So Jefferson's 1804 philosophy of Jesus, right, was designed for use of Native Americans with miraculous events such as healings and the resurrection of the dead. So miraculous acts attributed to Jesus were included. And this is a longer list, right? Resurrection of Jairus' daughter, healing of the Sabbath, healing of the bleeding woman, 2 blind men, the blind, lame, lepers, and deaf, and raising of the dead. He included those. He taught about hell. He believed in hell. He taught about heaven and angels. That's in Matthew and Luke. He taught on eternal life. He spoke of the resurrection of the dead, the second coming of Christ. Other passages refer to the divine, the miraculous, heaven, hell, and other supernatural subjects, indicating other miraculous acts throughout the Gospels. So Jefferson placed emphasis on these in his works. So he was by no means someone who was trying to reject or ridicule or get rid of any of these miraculous events. Of these, in no way, like the secularists and like the Enlightenment thinkers, was he trying to get rid of the divine. So Jefferson on religion and government. The original manuscript is lost, but what they call the table of texts includes an account of Christ's healings. So, did Jefferson advocate for separation of church and state? Well, his 1802 letter to the Danbury Baptists cited a wall of separation, which is often used by groups like the ACLU to sue the heck out of people who want to be religious. So, why did Jefferson then attend? And we're going to talk about this again later, and I'll come back to this topic, and we'll speak about this. Why did Jefferson attend public worship in the U.S. Capitol 2 days after his letter? Because the U.S. Capitol building, used to host church services, and as many as 2,000 people would attend those church services in the Capitol building. And now, of course, we're supposed to have a separation of church and state. That means that It's the removal of Christianity from the state, and of course the adoption of secularist Satanism, wokeism instead. So did Jefferson maybe read the Quran to God and write against the infiltration of Islam? Well, you have to also realize that America's army was founded, the Marines were founded specifically to deal with the Islamic threat. The Muslims were levying jizya on America. They were taking something like 20% of America's national gross domestic product. And they were kidnapping, they were pirates on the seas. They were kidnapping Americans. They were imprisoning them. They were raping the women. They were probably raping the men. So, and they were enslaving men, women, and children. They were killing men. They were sinking boats. They were stealing. They were plundering. And so he was aware, and he had discussions with Muslims, like with the ambassador of Morocco, and he told them, "We're doing this for religious reasons. It's our right as Muslims to steal your stuffs, and enslave your peoples, and do the R thing to your women's, and probably the men and kids too." So yeah, Jefferson wanted to know what he was dealing with, and he knew it was evil. Why did he permit church services in the War Office and the Treasury building during his presidency? This was allowed, and it should be promoted. He had no problem with it. In a separate 1802 letter, Jefferson expressed his belief in a government that includes religion. He preferred an administration that integrates faith rather than one devoid of it. And Jefferson was a friend of the Christian faith, but later it seems he was not an Orthodox Christian. He was a nominal Christian at the very minimum, as demonstrated by his lifelong practice of attending church worship services. He read the Bible and he followed the moral principles of Christ. So definitely some strong Christian influence there. Okay, he certainly didn't get his religious leanings from Buddha or from, I don't know, Voltaire or from Muhammad. So yes, Tony Lynch. So it appears they were very much promoting freedom as God gives free will. Yet it is imbibed with a mindset respecting God's word, acting as Jesus, respecting or Jesus above all ideologies. And yes, I'd agree that's a fair statement. So let's continue. So Philip says the TLM has occurred at the Capitol in recent years. That's awesome stuff. That's good to know. Yeah. Okay. And Joe Blog says, I hope Trump brings that back. Yes, let's hope so. Write to him on Truth Social and X and let him know. Okay, so let's do a couple more pages. So Jefferson versus the ACLU. So the ACLU sues to allow Quranic oaths in North Carolina courts because the ACLU is just so pro-Islam. The ACLU sues over court oaths. The North Carolina chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union has filed a lawsuit. Now, don't forget, these guys will sue if they smell a whiff of Christianity near a school, near a bus stop, anything that the federal government built. If they smell anything remotely Christian near a university, they're going to come down with 50 lawyers and sue the heck out of you, right? So they filed a lawsuit asking the state to rule that the term Holy Scriptures refers not just to the Bible, but to other sacred texts. See? Because everything's the same. Everything is, this is moral relativism. And the founding fathers clearly did not view other religions in the same light. They viewed other religions as inferior. Let's call it that. So Jefferson signed legislation granting land to Indian missionaries. Oh my, he gave land to Indian missionaries. He rewarded missionary work. He established government-funded chaplains, government-funded priests. Oh my golly. He enacted penalties for irreverent behavior among soldiers because they must be virtuous. They must be moral. Interesting. I wonder what kind of morality was he talking about? Muslim morality or Christian morality? He proposed an Indian treaty that allocated funds for a priest's salary and church construction. Oh my golly. Church money received from the government? The government's paying to build churches. Yes, definitely. The Church of Satan. Yeah, I mean, the Church of Satan is an antithetical entity. Evan, yeah, I'd have to look into that. I mean, so yeah, I don't want to go down that road. That's not something I'm interested in exploring. And I knew this was going to come up because everyone's a Freemason and the Queen is a lizard and all of that stuff, and fine and well. So yeah, we'll get into all of that. Maybe in the future, but right now it's not relevant. It's not important. I've got a specific topic I want to stick to. So he proposed an Indian treaty that allocated funds for a priest's salary and church construction. So the church was paying for priest salaries and church construction. I'd say that is a non-separation of church and state. That is definitely the overlap of church and state. That is the church promoting the state and the state promoting the church. That is an endorsement of the church by the state. That is activism for the church by the state. That's something, and somehow we'll start to look at how these laws have been reinterpreted and misinterpreted, and suddenly we've flipped it upside down. Jefferson dated an official document not in the year of our Lord, which was the common practice of the day, but he named it in the year of our Lord Christ. Now, in the year of our Lord Christ, does that make him, let's see, 1, a Buddhist, 2, a Martian, 3, a Muslim, 4, an atheist, or 5, a Christian? If you think it's 5, drop a 5 in the chat. I know you guys are not doing that. I'm very disappointed. I was looking to see a whole sort of wave of numbers in the chat. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, clearly the Lord Christ, I think there's a clue there. I'm guessing, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing the year of our Lord Christ doesn't refer to Lord Krishna. Christian historian David Barton has the proof. He's got the original document signed by Jefferson on the 18th day of October in the year of our Lord Christ, 1804. So the Declaration of Independence and the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom states that due to the example of the holy author of our religion, which is Jesus, individuals should be free to believe or disbelieve. Jefferson showed that he did not advocate for a separation of God and government as secularists insist. So they will take what they can to try to spin it into a yarn that he insisted on this incredible thick wall, this utter separation of Christian belief, Christian doctrine from government, when clearly in practice this is not the case. On a regular basis, when he was president, Jefferson attended the Christian worship services in the Capitol, which he approved of, and these continued long after he was president. And then, of course, in 1947, the Supreme Court ruled that Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state must be kept high and impregnable. We could not approve the slightest breach. So your Supreme Court in the US has, let's just say that is what you would call a mistake. The Supreme Court here called it completely wrong. So, no, the Freemasons, they're definitely not Christians. I mean, they are Satanists at the end of the day, and many of them have Muslim leanings. And I've discussed it on my channel. Look up the KKK episodes, and you can see a lot of information there. So Jefferson versus Christian Orthodoxy. So I'll do one more page after this. The assertion that Jefferson increasingly leaned away from Christian Orthodoxy as he aged is generally considered true. In his early life, he adhered to Orthodox beliefs, and he was elected as a vestryman in the Anglican Church, and he promised to conform to its doctrines. So he was active in the church, which means that this episode is dynamite load. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Catherine. That's good to know. Guys, if you do like it, if you do enjoy the content, please, of course, like, share, subscribe. And if you'd like to buy me a coffee, that is always appreciated. And I'll be doing a few episodes of this. We're going to look at this. We're going to provide more. So hopefully this is an interesting, you can see the narrative is not what we've been told. And I'll be the Barbary pirates. Yes. So that's something that, the Muslims, that's what Jefferson was very concerned about. So as he aged, especially during the Restoration movement, that's it, the Restorationist movement that I mentioned, he adopted an unorthodox perspective, aligning with what's called Christian primitivism. This is where literally hundreds of people were saying, hold on, mainstream Christianity is wrong. We have read the Bible and we have come to the conclusion of what is true Christianity, and we are now restoring the true church. And then literally hundreds of people made that claim, and they couldn't agree with each other. They disagreed with each other. Many of them are what you would call mainstream Protestant denominations. Denomination really means to be derived from an original root source, that source being the Catholic Church. You are denomination, a devolution of the name being the Catholic Church. And so you are simply a branch, a strand, a denomination, a broke off piece, a lesser piece, if you will. Though that's interesting what the term denomination refers to. But there was hundreds and hundreds of these sects that sprung up, people who were claiming to have restored the original church. And in fact, when you read the history of that, which I've covered on my channel before, when you read the history of these claims, and one of the ways that they were asked to prove their lineage to the original church, being the apostles, they would say, well, this is our lineage, and every single one of these people went through known heresies. We're not talking ambiguously, we're talking flaming heretics, like rampaging heretics. We're talking men in lipstick rampaging through the streets, gay as heck, sort of, unambiguously gay, well, unambiguously heretical. And that is seriously problematic. So he enters into this whole Christian primitivism mindset, and he also develops anti-Trinitarian sentiments. He rejected doctrines he had previously accepted, including the Trinity, the Immaculate Conception, and the resurrection. That would make him a heretic. By any standard, by any Orthodox Christian standard, this makes him a heretic. Despite these shifts, Jefferson maintained a belief in a personal God and with the moral teachings of Jesus throughout his life, consistently identifying himself as a Christian. Don't forget, Mormons also identify themselves as Christians. And you have people who, Gnostics identify themselves as Christians too, while having a significant disagreement with Orthodox interpretations. So he rejected the deity of Christ, but this also requires some level of context. Why did he heresy? So the question from Joe Blogs is why he heresied. I mean, remember I mentioned that this whole Enlightenment nonsense was going on. This whole I'm trying to undermine the historical method. They're trying to people claim Jesus didn't exist, and I mean at this point there was this strong movement based on the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was an anti-Christian movement. It was a pro-socialist movement. It was basically communism. It was genocidal communism. It was the first atheist state. So the French Revolution state, was the very first atheist state. It was a genocidal bloodbath. This was the birth of reason. It formed cults. It formed satanic and pagan Gnostic cults. It was a complete disaster, which atheists are embarrassed by. When you ask, atheists don't know the history of modern atheism. It's an embarrassment to them, not something they want to discuss, not something they might, not something they know about potentially, but not something they want to know about, because it is a humiliation for their claims of reason and justice. And the first atheist state and all the subsequent communist atheist states have been an utter failure. So yeah, he seemed to go along with this mindset, with these philosophers. He got, just like many others, they imbibed this sort of view. They wanted to be modern. It was cool to be modern, fashionable perhaps. So yeah, he initially upheld Orthodox belief, affirming the divine mission of Jesus and the resurrection, but later expressed doubt, stating he was of a sect by myself. In other words, opinion. He had personal opinions. What validity and authority are there to these opinions? Nothing. Literally nothing. If everyone can have an opinion on a topic, if everyone can have their opinion on what 1 + 1 is, then yeah, there's only one right answer, but there's millions of wrong answers, billions of wrong answers, an endless stream of wrong answers. So yeah, you can form an opinion, and he has that right. But yeah, so anyway, his later writings focused on the moral teachings of Jesus, rejecting Trinity and deity, criticizing doctrines attributed to Jesus as corruptions introduced by his followers. Now, hold on. There's another group headed by a guy called Mo, who also claimed that there were corruptions introduced by his followers. I wonder where he got this idea. Good grief. Yeah. So, and this is true. And I mean, I've been very open on my channel about this. Protestants open the door to every crackpot of the platform, become the springboard to chaos. Yeah, there is a lot of chaos. I mean, this does lead to chaos. It is chaotic. So yeah. So while Jefferson didn't entirely abandon belief in Jesus as a moral teacher, he moved away from Orthodox Christian understanding of Christ's divine nature. Final slide. I'll stop here on slide number 20. So this is Jefferson's grandson once again. And he writes here about Jefferson's beliefs, so we can have a good understanding of Jefferson when he was very much, and his genuine Christian beliefs here, or his moral beliefs, and the foundation of his moral beliefs that went into these founding American documents. In compliance with your request, this is when he's writing to the guy who's doing the biography of Jefferson. I've committed to paper my reminiscence of Mr. Jefferson, as they are still green and fresh in my memory. I was 34 years old when he died. I was more intimate with him than with any man I've ever known. His character invited such intimacy. soft and feminine in his affections to his family. He sympathized with all their feelings, winning them to paths of virtue by the gentleness of his manner. And I must say, I have never heard from him the expression of one thought, feeling, or sentiment inconsistent with the highest moral standard or the purest Christian charity. Notice not Buddhist charity, not atheist charity, Christian charity. His moral character was of the highest order, founded upon the purest and sternest models of antiquity. So he respected ancient philosophers as well. Softened, chastened, and yet developed. So he filtered these philosophies through the lens of Christ, developed by the influences of the all-pervading benevolence of the doctrines of Christ, which he had intensely and admiringly studied. As a proof of this, he left 2 codifications of the morals of Jesus, one for himself and another for the Indians, the first of which I now possess. And this is his grandson, who says he had the most intimate relationship with his grandfather. He was closer to his grandfather than anyone else. And the morals of Jesus, into which he pasted extracts in Greek, Latin, French, and English, taken textually from the 4 Gospels and so arranged that he could run his eyes over the readings of the same verse in 4 languages. So, yeah, he never uttered an untruth himself. So clearly not Muslim, He clearly was very interested in truth. He never used duplicity. Well, Islam does this. It's legal in the Sharia. Both of these are legal. And he regarded with contempt, it in others. And no end with him could sanctify falsehood. So he stood for truth because he believed that Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So we'll end off on the slide today. So Thomas Jefferson Randolph, the grandson of Thomas Jefferson, in response to author Henry S. Randall's request for memories of Jefferson, right? So said that Randolph portrays Jefferson as embodying high moral standards and Christian charity. So he highlights distinct Christian elements in Jefferson's outlook, including his deep admiration for the doctrines of Christ. And Jefferson would practically apply Christian morals in his life. So this wasn't just a theoretical admiration. He notes that Jefferson's study of the Gospels and mentions 2 manuscripts in which he codified the morals of Jesus. So Jefferson very seriously engaged with Christian ethics. He attended church. He contributed to the construction of local churches, disapproved of profanity and gambling, which illustrated Christian values. And Randolph emphasized that Jefferson viewed religious study as a personal duty, advocating for individual exploration of religious beliefs. So these reminiscences reveal a Jefferson as a man whose moral philosophy was profoundly influenced by Christian teachings, by Jesus. And this portrayed him not only as a philosopher, because he loved philosophy, he read the other philosophers. He was trying to refine his thinking to create the most perfect nation, the most successful nation. They clearly succeeded. But also he was a person of deep moral conviction, very much aligned with Christian values. And Joe Blogg says, works are nothing without belief, as is belief nothing without works. And Catherine says he deeply loved Jesus. It reads like, did anyone accuse Jefferson of being a homosexual after this? No, I doubt it. I mean, language was different back then. So guys, I'll end here. Hopefully this was enlightening. Hopefully you've learned something of value. Hopefully you can see that where this will go as I go through some of the other episodes of this. You will see that Jefferson and the others, Adams, John Quincy Adams, and so on, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, 2 separate figures, and others, these people, Sherman, these were very much influenced by Christianity. And you'll find it in their writings. And the story you've been told is false, that these people were deists, these people were atheists, these people were Enlightenment thinkers, because they're trying to glorify the Enlightenment, which was a genocide. The Enlightenment was a depraved, pagan, Gnostic, atheistic, socialist genocide. That's all it was. So these are people who are, spreading fake news. And of course, now you've got an inkling that the reality is somewhat different, that America is a Christian nation, and it's meant to be a Christian nation. And hopefully you can recapture that, return America to the correct moral path that it should be on, and really be that shining house on the hill, be that light to the world, and to spread Christian virtue throughout the world. I mean, humans are not perfect, and clearly even the founding fathers made errors. The Supreme Court made an error. But these are things that we can probably deal with, we can fix, and we can understand. These people still were idealistic, and they made an effort, and they tried. And even though they failed, they were still giants. They did very well. So yeah, but let's try to stand on the shoulders of these giants and do a little better. Okay, so I will leave this here. And FM Knight says, this was amazing and enlightening. Wish our education system can teach the truth. Thank you for your hard work. God bless you and your family. So yeah, well, guys, yeah, you're very welcome. So I will talk about this next week. I should be on tomorrow with Paul Sutcliffe. We'll be talking about Islam, Jihad, and the Muslim Brotherhood. So that should be at about 7:30 p.m., roughly the same time tomorrow. And Sunday, I should have JC and Thunderous on with me. And I'm trying to get Dr. Kufar Phobia on for next week. And of course, Tuesday, I will have Usama Dakdok. And I'll try and do part 2 of this next week. So yeah, guys, thanks. Have a wonderful night. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful day ahead. And thanks for joining me on this talk. And I'll see you guys soon. Good night.